G'day folks, how's it going? In this video today we're going to try to do a couple of things. Firstly, we're going to start up by doing a bit of a wrap up of some of the aircraft accidents that have occurred in 2018. And secondly, we're going to try to look at comparisons between what has eventuated this year and we're going to compare it to the last 4 or 5 years. You will see that there has been quite a significant shift in trending, which I personally find quite disturbing. And you know what? I really want to try to figure out. I'm David East, and you're watching CrewFusion TV. It's 2018, and the amount of commercial airliners that are currently airborne at any one time on our planet is truly incredible. Hundreds of thousands of people that are sitting back quietly somewhere near 40,000 feet in their aluminium or carbon fibre tubes, watching their in-flight entertainment with their Beats by Dre or Bose on, willingly putting their plans in the hands of a couple of pilots who are sitting in the front of that plane, doing their jobs to the best of their ability. Statistically speaking, being on that aircraft is by far the best way to travel when you compare it to other forms of transportation. It is clearly obvious that you are far more likely to have a car accident on our roads than you are being involved in an air crash. The last 5 years has indeed seen a significant reduction in commercial airline crashes though. 2017, in fact, has been documented as the safest year in commercial aviation ever. So why is this? What has made commercial aviation so safe? Now look, there are so many answers to that question. Modern technology, modern thinking, they've all contributed. A lot of lessons that have been learned from 115 years of aviation, and some terrible disasters that have culminated in an extremely safe system to operate under. So now we're coming towards the end of 2018, and if we were to wrap up this year, the stats are suddenly not looking so good. Hundreds of lives have been lost this year in aviation. Not to forget that there were also plenty of incidences where crews and passengers were really lucky to get off that plane alive. Take a look at this graph, which I've used from the Aviation Safety Network website. What it does is it shows the correlation between the last 5 years' average loss of life and it compares it to 2018. So here you can see that the blue line, which represents 2018, has been well above the red line that represents the 5-year average from 2012 to 2017. This trend began this year on the 11th of Feb with the Saratov Airlines Antonov AN-148 crash in Moscow. Now this aircraft had 71 crew and passengers on board, all of whom unfortunately lost their lives in this accident. The official report hasn't been released on this accident yet, but preliminary reports are that the crew didn't have the pitot heat turned on. Now the pitot heat probes are two probes that stick out of the side of the aircraft at the front, and what their job is to measure the uninterrupted airflow for the flight instruments, particularly the airspeed indicators. These probes are heated at all times to prevent icing under pretty well all conditions. This crew, it seems, didn't turn that heat on. They are always turned off on the ground as they get extremely hot with no airflow on them. So it's always in the before takeoff checklist to ensure that they're turned on. On this day, it was a -5 degrees outside air temp. So they would have already had ice build up before takeoff most likely, and this clearly would contribute to unreliable airspeed indications as soon as they got airborne. The pilot and co-pilot's instrument reads from separate probes, and that's just in case one system were to fail. It provides a bit of a redundancy. So this crew saw the different airspeeds across their two primary displays and even the standby instrument. The pilot's airspeed was decreasing, while the co-pilot's on the other side was raising in airspeed. So after takeoff, with these unreliable airspeed indications, what this crew decided to do was that they turned off the autopilot. Now, what that did was put the aircraft back into manual control. They didn't know what airspeed they were doing. The aircraft ended up stalling at a height of 5,500 feet, and from witness observations, some say that the aircraft came down in flames, indicating, possibly a structural failure in flight. And while the aircraft quickly descended at about 30 degrees impacting the ground. So pretty uncool way to end in that accident. A week later, on the 18th of February 2018, we had an ATR 72 from Iranian Asaman Airlines, and it had 66 people on board. And it had a controlled flight into terrain incident. It was flying into Yasuj Airport, and if you look at the pictures here, you can see that the crew has potentially become disoriented during their approach. They've gone below the minimum safe altitude, and they impacted the Mount Denner range. It seems the crew were coming in for the DME approach, and it also seems they were following the correct. Initially, they were following the correct steps for that approach, but as they reached the minimum safe altitude for the area of 17,000 feet, the air traffic controllers lost contact with the aircraft. So we're not really sure at this stage what led to them crashing into that terrain, but unfortunately, with 66 people killed, I hope we do find out and learn from it soon. The next significant crash that occurred was on the 12th of March, when a US Bangla Airlines Q400 crashed at Kathmandu Airport in Nepal. Now this crash is really important because it clearly shows that either the crew or the air traffic control tower, or both of them, had made some pretty serious errors. Basically what occurred is as the aircraft approached the airfield, the crew showed signs of loss of situational awareness, they showed signs of disorientation, and they weren't communicating effectively. Later reports showed that the captain of this aircraft was suffering potential mental stress during the flight and had even lit up a cigarette just before the approach. Now, this is in clear violation to any airline's policy. Cockpit voice recorder transcripts tell of the captain complaining for most of the flight about one of the female staff members from their airline, who he had previously had an argument with regarding his job, and at one stage he had even started crying in the cockpit. The aircraft was initially cleared to land on runway 02, which he acknowledged, but he made had made errors during the approach, so that he was unable to make 02. He was probably too high, so he asked if he could circle around for runway 20. This was communicated, but the tower replied, stating that there was another aircraft approaching 20, so they couldn't land on that one just yet. From here, there was a lot of confusion. It reigned between the crew and the tower. They stated that they had lost situational awareness, and during the follow-on approach, they almost hit the terminal. They missed it by only 45 feet. They almost hit the tower. Then they managed to land. It was a very unsatisfactory landing, clearly. They came off the runway sharply and ended up bursting into flames off to the side of the runway. Now, there were 71 occupants that were on that flight. 20 of them were freed safely, but of those, 2 died later in hospital, unfortunately. The final report on this accident has not been released, but preliminary reports are the source of the captain's mental health issues. So now we move on to the next crash. Well, this one wasn't a crash, but Southwest Airlines Flight 1380. It was a 737 that had an uncontained engine failure during the cruise. What occurred here is as they were flying along in the cruise, the crew felt the thump of the failure, and they recognised that the engine instruments for the left-hand engine were showing the same indications it was of an engine failure. Now, as the fan case basically shook itself to bits, the fan case of the engine disintegrated and left the aircraft, which then caused the side cowls of the engine to open. Now, this provided an immense amount of drag, which caused a rapid roll to the left, which had to be quickly managed by the crew. Now, part of that engine cowl that separated ended up hitting the number 14 window. It smashed it and caused a rapid decompression within that aircraft. This sucked the passenger that was sitting there partially out of the window, which killed her, unfortunately, and 8 other packs that were sitting around there were also injured. Now, the captain of this aircraft, Captain Tammy Jo Schultz, she showed outstanding airmanship in the way she handled the aircraft. She got oxygen to the packs quickly. They put themselves on oxygen, and she managed to divert to Philadelphia, and they landed safely. All the while remaining really calm and doing all of the great things that a good pilot does by remaining calm and communicating like a boss. Tammy's history as one of the US Navy's first female fighter pilots and a high-hours airline pilot clearly prepared her well for this emergency situation by having a massive human factors win with outstanding situational awareness, good comm skills, good decision-making, good task-focused management, not becoming too focused on a particular task, but just big-picture management, getting that aircraft on the ground, which is outstanding. Now, this is a great example of what to do when things go bang. A couple of interesting points here. This is the very first fatality in US commercial aviation since 2009. and the first fatality for Southwest Airlines ever. Now, this is an airline that's been operating since 1967, so that's an outstanding result. Here's another interesting point for you, and for those of you that are superstitious. So the fan blade that actually cracked and left the engine, causing this engine to basically disintegrate, turned out to be the number 13 fan blade. Now the bits that came off that cowling, now they destroyed the row 14 window. For those of you that don't know, airliners do not have a row 13. Next time you're walking down the aisle, getting on that plane, take a note as you're going down, and I guarantee you the rows will go from row 12 to row 14. There is no row 13. This is definitely a thing. Now this is due to an old airline unwritten rule, because you know what, they could never sell tickets for people to sit in row 13. People were too superstitious. No one wanted to sit there. So in this accident, with the cowling striking row 14, it actually hit the 13th row. And like I said, it was number 13 fan blade. So that's certainly a little bit freaky. And if you're any way superstitious, that's going to get you thinking. So here's another one. 1 month later, Cubana Aviation Flight 172, another 737-200 in this case. Now it crashed shortly after takeoff out of Havana in Cuba, with the loss of all 112 lives. Apologies, correction, not all of 112 lives. There was one unbreakable person that survived. Now there's not a lot of detail on this crash. Authorities in Cuba are yet to release an official report, but witnesses and a lot of social media reports have come out about this one, which, you know, when it comes out of social media, you need to take it with a grain of salt, because it's not substantiated. But what they do talk of is, with this airline, they talk of shoddy airworthiness standards, shoddy maintenance, not a very good safety program, and even cases of aircraft not being loaded correctly, with overloading, weight and balance coming under scrutiny in previous flights to this one. So look, whenever you get that sort of perfect storm of all these things happening and all these stories coming in, your eyebrows are definitely going to raise. And you can't help but think, okay, maybe those are some of the causal factors which could have led to this accident occurring. We also have eyewitnesses in this incident stating that they saw the aircraft climbing out. And it was climbing out at a really steep angle. It was much higher than normal rate. It eventually stalled, but you can clearly see in the video that I've attached, the aircraft loses all forward momentum and pancakes into the ground. Now that's a terrible way to go. Other than that, I don't know a lot about this one, so if you guys have any input, please let me know. A couple of other things. We had a couple of Cessna Caravan incidents. They were both CFIT, controlled flight into terrain. One was in Nepal with 2 killed after impacting a mountain at 12,800 feet. And another was in Kenya, with the aircraft being lost on radar and discovered a day later at an altitude of 11,000 feet. There were 2 LET L410 incidents with 24 loss of lives. And now these are little bizjet aircraft. Both occurred in Africa, so there's really not a lot of information on these accidents. There's really nothing has come out about the details. Now here's a particularly poignant one, which I found quite distressing, was the Junkers Ju-52, and which crashed in the Swiss Alps while it was doing a tourist flight between 2 points. Now, this is the first fatal crash of the Junkers. I hope I'm saying that right. Is it Junkers, Junkers? I hope I'm saying that right. But it's the first fatal crash of this type since his company bought the aircraft way back in 1982. So accounts state that the aircraft entered into a left turn, which eventually resulted in a stall and culminated in it spiralling basically vertically into the mountains below and killed all 20 people on board, unfortunately. A few interesting facts here. The aircraft was built in 1939. That's an 80-year-old aircraft right there. And it was used in the movies Valkyrie and Where Eagles Dare. So I remember seeing Valkyrie, and it's an outstanding-looking jet. On the day of the crash, the Junkers was piloted by 2 veteran captains, aged 62 and age 63. They both had extensive experience as pilots for Swiss Air and Edelweiss and Swiss Airline, as well as more than 30 years of military service with the Swiss Air Force. So, you know, these guys are really experienced and clearly know what they're doing. They both had several hundred flight hours worth of experience with the Junkers as well. The third crew member was one of the flight attendants down the back. Now, she was a 66-year-old flight attendant. She had 40 years of professional experience. Yeah, so a real shame here. And unfortunately, despite of all that experience in the flight deck and in that cabin, all of that love of aviation that crew had, and clearly a love of aviation that all of the passengers had, because you don't get on board this aircraft unless you really, really want to, get up in something really rugged and tough and just see the way this aircraft flies. It seems that structural integrity was a cause here. Looks like the main wing spar has failed during that left-hand turn. It's definitely come under scrutiny as one of the potential causal factors. So yeah, what a massive shame that is. What else have we got? The next big one. Oh look, one of the most scenic aircraft accidents of recent times. This one's amazing. But the Air Niugini Flight 737-800 that crashed while approaching Ponapai in Micronesia. Now with this jet sitting proudly in Chuck Lagoon off Ponapai there, while everyone was able to get out, well, maybe not everyone, really were amazing pictures. So, and once again, now this aircraft is operated by PNG. So with those sort of countries, you don't get a lot of accurate information from these, and definitely the reports seem to take a fairly long time. So there hasn't been a lot released as to how and why this happened. And at the time, reporting was actually pretty terrible on the day and the day after the incident, because some were saying that this happened after takeoff, others were saying it occurred on the approach. So, I think finally the preliminary report states that it occurred on approach, but it's just a bit of a rock show with what was actually going on in the initial sort of 24 to 48 hours. Unfortunately, initial reports also stated that all survived. Now, this was thanks in large to US Navy dive team who were diving on the Chuck Lagoon nearby, and they carried out the initial rescue efforts. For those that don't know, Chuck Lagoon is actually it's full of old World War II equipment. They basically pushed it all into the water at the end of World War II there. So it's a magnificent dive spot. Now, these Navy divers were diving on that spot and see the 737 come into crash. Oh, crap. Cool. Let's go help these guys out. Awesome. So, yeah, now they thought they got everybody off the aircraft. It wasn't until some time later, when an accurate head count was done, and it was actually a few days later, they found out that someone was missing. So divers had to go back out to the reef, and sure enough, they found a body lodged in the reef 3 days later. So yeah, we're looking forward to seeing what factors were at play in this crash, because it's just an interesting one as to how this was occurred. Once again, a month later, we seem to be getting one a month. Clearly the most significant crash of 2018. 189 souls lost on Lion Air Flight 610. Whew, this one's a tough one. A 737 MAX, which crashed at high speed into the ocean off Java in Indonesia after a potential flight control system failure. Now, this is an incident that we can talk about for hours, clearly, but I'm going to summarise it quickly for now by stating that the speculating around this incident started immediately as basically an attack on Lion Air, an attack on its crew, and an attack on the fact that it's a budget airline. Okay, whenever you think budget airline, you're thinking cutbacks on maintenance, you're thinking cutbacks on training, on who they employ, you're thinking cutbacks on standards, and like this is an airline that was growing so quickly in the Asia region that it has reportedly dropped safety as a priority in order to buy more planes, get more crews, and move the millions of people that live in the Asian region. Now, it's a big call, okay? Just because it's a budget airline doesn't necessarily mean that they've got all these cutbacks. Unfortunately, Lion Air does not have a very good reputation, so some of them may be true, some of them may not be. You look at Jetstar in Australia, there's no cutbacks there. That is an airline that does it right, and clearly they've got a very good safety record. So yeah, it just depends where you are and where you're at, and what the priorities are for that airline in that region. Now, personally, look, I was really sceptical from the start with this one. I didn't post anything on this crash on social media initially, because it's a big one, it's important, and I didn't want to get it wrong. I didn't want to stuff it up, all right? Because I knew there was more than one side of this story. Immediately we saw guys, like in Australia, we saw guys come on the morning TV shows, like a pilot with 4 bars on his shoulder, apparently an experienced pilot, just slagging the airline, just slagging the pilots for stuffing up, all right? Now, if I were that guy, I'd be pretty embarrassed, because it doesn't seem out that it was their fault. As it turned out, there's certainly... there is more to this story, okay? A few days later, Boeing drops a massive bombshell by stating that the MAX's MCAS system has not been properly introduced, it has not been properly tested or documented. Everyone's like, what the fuck are you talking about? What? So MCAS, it's the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. Now, it's a 737 MAX specific system, and it's due to the new aerodynamic forces that are acting on the aircraft as a result of the fact that it's got bigger engines, and because they're bigger engines, they're actually fitted further forward than previous 737s. So there's different aerodynamic effects acting on this aircraft compared to previous 737s, okay? Now, during testing, Boeing realised that the jet flew differently. Okay, that's cool, that's understandable. So what they did is they built this MCAS system. Okay, and what it was built for, it was designed to assist the pilots by providing an automatic nose-down trim to prevent stalls under certain conditions. The MCAS system has allowed a runaway nose-down trim effect during this flight. Now, this was following a series of faults with previous flights that were directly specific to the flight control portion and the angle of attack portion of the flight control system. Now, look, guys, I don't know about you, but being a pilot in a pristine plane like this, that's just doing its own thing, where it just wanted to nosedive, is potentially the scariest situation that you could ever be in as a pilot. Just imagine what that crew must have experienced as they fought to maintain altitude and prevent it pointing at the ocean. This is so scary, where besides their best efforts, the aircraft just wanted to nosedive. It reminds me of that situation where designers many years ago, they tried to figure out why the first jet airliners, the Comet, the de Havilland Comet, was exploding mid-flight. Now, it took them a long time to figure out that the square cabin windows that they built into the fuselage, now they were causing fatigue cracks, which eventually led to a bunch of aircraft being lost. So those designers actually had to chase that up. They had to figure out what was going on. They went to a lot of work to figure out where the problem was with that aircraft. Now, that was back in the 1950s, 1960s. Here, we've got a design fault that Boeing actually knew about, and they didn't document it properly. Now, I surely hope heads are going to roll over this, because that is a classic organisational failure of massive magnitude. The repercussions from this incident are going to be long-running and industry-wide, as the world's biggest manufacturer has clearly got a lot to answer for in this case. So now I've covered off on all of the major civilian crashes, which is actually what the Aviation Safety Network website looks at. It looks at commercial airliner traffic with aircraft with more than 14 seats as its benchmark for this graph. Okay, it doesn't actually look at military. The US military had a really, really bad year in 2018. Things got so bad that the commander of the US Air Force, he had to call a mandatory stand down. It was a mandatory no-fly day for all of its members in an effort to get groups together and chat about the issues that are affecting them, so that the commanders had a chance to really listen to them and collate those problems for policymakers and personnel alike. Now, that's a pretty good move. I mean, the US Air Force isn't a small organisation, so to make a call like that, to say, everyone stop work, talk to each other, and figure out why we are having so many crashes. I personally got a chance to write about some of the reasons and thinking behind some of the crashes, and what the US military as an organisation has done to perhaps cause them, and potentially what they're going to do to fix that problem. I've put a link for that blog that I wrote about at the beginning of the year. That's in the comments below, so go ahead and take a look if you'd like. One of those incidents was a US Air National Guard WC-130 Hercules. Now, this was a model that was actually going on its flight to the AMARC graveyard, so it was due for retirement, and it was going to the graveyard that they have out in the desert in Arizona there. It was being flown by a crew and a couple of maintainers in the back. As it took off, it had an engine failure and eventually come into a dynamic stall and effectively just left wing dropped. It nosedived into the ground and crashed into a freeway just in Georgia. What a terrible, terrible accident. Like these are military guys. Because it's US Air Force or because it's US military, a report has been released on this already, which is just fantastic work from them. Unfortunately, that report talks of a really bad maintenance culture, a toxic maintenance culture, because no one really wanted to work there. They did want to work there, but they worked in Puerto Rico. The maintenance guys were of the understanding in their own minds that because they were in Puerto Rico, they didn't contribute to the whole US Air Force mission. They were just like a reserve squadron down there. No one really cared about them, and it seems that they weren't putting their effort into getting these aircraft fixed. Now, this aircraft had a number one engine power problem the day before on the flight up, so the techos got out and fixed it, but they didn't fix it in accordance with the spec at all, and they didn't get it back to 100%. They literally got it to a power setting that was just below 100%, and they couldn't get the extra power because they didn't use the correct gauges. Now, when the next day when they went to take off, as well as the maintenance problems, and this was the last flight for that aircraft. An experienced captain didn't brief any emergency procedures. He just said that emergency brief is as previous flights. That's it. No. So when he had number one engine failure, they struggled with handling it. The flight engineer really didn't call much at all. He didn't say a lot during the whole thing. He should be the one calling exactly what's going on with that engine, allowing the pilot to fly. There wasn't a lot out of him. The captain used incorrect rudder. In fact, he used left rudder, a little bit of right rudder, left rudder, right rudder, trying to figure out which rudder to use to get that aircraft airborne and keep it on a straight and level. In the end, he used the wrong rudder, causing a dynamic stall. It was just a litany of errors in this case, and it all stemmed from a bad culture. The fact that it was the aircraft's last flight, it was that what could possibly go wrong attitude, and it killed them all. Just terrible, unfortunately. So that wraps up all of the major incidents this year, except for a couple that happened in December. We had an AN-26 from Gomer in the Congo, which crashed during their approach, and that killed all 7 on board. Because it's in Africa, we don't have a lot of information on that one either. And another big incident off Japan, where a US Marine C-130J and F-A-18D Hornet collided mid-air. Unfortunately, with that one of the Hornet crew was lost, and 5 of the crew that was on the C-130J were unfortunately lost in that terrible accident as well. They're all US Marines. So let's finish up by asking a few questions. Why has 2018 been such a bad year for commercial and military operations? With a 5-year average of 383 fatalities per year, why has it suddenly jumped to 556 this year? Now, these are questions I would like you guys and girls out there to help me answer. I've personally got some thoughts on why, and I'd like to drop geography as one factor in these incidences. When you look at a lot of where these accidents are occurring, you might really need to have a serious think about your travel plans if you're planning on moving around those parts of the planet. But what is really happening here? Every one of these incidents has a human factors component to what happened. Now, there will always be a human factor element in every incident, won't there? Considering that humans are involved in every aspect of aviation, from designing and building aircraft to training and operating the aircraft, that human factor causality is forever going to be a dead set certainty in every accident. Okay, and I'll tell you why that is. There will always be factors such as fatigue, situational awareness, the errors that you make, being task focused, communication, is that effective, making the right decisions. You might be stressed, there might be distractions. These are all what makes us human. So it's the understanding of these factors and knowing when they're likely to come and bite you. That's the really important part. So look, I'd really like to hear from you guys. I'd like to hear your opinions. You can certainly add a comment below. They're always appreciated, and it's a good way to get the conversation happening. But in the new year, what I'm looking at doing is going one step further and getting some video chats happening on the CrewFusion Zoom room page that I've got. I've already got some keen contributors lined up that want to help out, but if you're keen, certainly drop us a message and we'd love to hear your thoughts. So look, that's all I've got for today, guys, with this video. Thanks very much for tuning in. Have a happy new year, fly safe, and let's work together in the future to ensure that 2019 is a better and safer year when you get on that plane and when you work around it. Have a good one. See you later.